Your opinion doesn't matter. That was the first thing my husband said to me less than 2 hours after I got home. I was still wearing the same gray Fort Campbell hoodie I'd slept in on the plane. My knees hurt from sitting too long, my shoulders were tight, and my head still felt full of jet noise and fluorescent lights. I'd been awake almost 23 hours by then, and Brent was standing in the kitchen with my dog's collar wrapped around his fist. Rain hammered against the back porch screen. Duke stood there, confused ears, low, muddy paws sliding a little on the tile because he'd gotten excited when I walked in and tracked water through the house. That was it. Muddy paw prints. Brent looked down at the floor like Duke had burned the place down. I just cleaned this, he snapped. I dropped my duffel beside the counter and reached for a paper towel. He's wet, Brent. I'll wipe it up. But he was already worked up, red-faced, buzzed, probably. There was an open can of Bud Light sweating beside the sink, and I could smell that sour mix of beer and cigarette smoke that always hung around him lately. I'm tired of this damn dog. Duke walked toward me slowly, tail wagging once. I bent down to pet him. Hey, buddy. That dog had slept beside my cot during mortar alerts in Kuwait. There were nights overseas I trusted him more than my own nervous system. He knew when my breathing changed before I did. Brent yanked Duke's collar hard enough that the tags clanged. Brent. I'm serious, Rachel. I'm tired of living in a damn kennel. It's a dog, he got excited. No, it's always something with you. He laughed once, sharp and ugly. The dog, your army crap, your schedules, your moods. I stared at him. Something about hearing your army crap hit different that night. Maybe because I was too tired to smooth it over. Maybe because I'd spent 9 months listening to 22-year-old soldiers hold themselves together better than my 47-year-old husband. Or maybe because deep down I already knew something in my marriage had died long before I walked through that front door. Brent pointed toward the hallway. You walk in here acting like you own the place. I actually blinked at him. Because technically I did. The house was in my name. Had been since 2017 when Brent's credit score was too wrecked from old debts to qualify for the mortgage. But that wasn't even the point. I looked at him and said quietly, "What is wrong with you?" That's when he said it. Your opinion doesn't matter. Then he shoved Duke toward the back door and yanked it open. Cold rain blew inside immediately. Brent, stop. Duke stumbled onto the porch, claws scraping wood. Not hurt, just startled. And what got me, what still gets me if I think about it too long, was the way Duke looked back at me. Not scared. Confused. Like he honestly believed I would fix it. I should have screamed, thrown something, told Brent to get out. Instead, my body did that thing it sometimes does after too much stress. Everything slowed down. Like somebody packed cotton inside my chest. I grabbed the towel hanging from the oven handle. I walked outside. Rain soaked through my hoodie in seconds. Duke pressed against my leg while I dried him off under the porch light. His fur smelled like wet leaves and dirt. Behind me, Brent muttered, "Unbelievable." I didn't answer. I just took Duke to the truck. The heater in my old Ford took forever to warm up. Duke curled into the passenger seat while rain streaked across the windshield in crooked lines. Clarksville looked dead that night. Just gas station lights and empty intersections shining wet under the storm. I drove toward the temporary kennel near base housing where a friend from my unit worked nights. About halfway there, my phone buzzed through the Bluetooth. Brent. I let it ring. Then I heard his voice anyway because he'd accidentally called through the truck audio after redialing too fast. And another voice answered. A woman. Cindy. I knew that voice, not personally but enough. She worked at some dental office Brent had mentioned a few times. You calm down, she asked him. Brent laughed softly. Man, I hated that laugh. The fake, relaxed one he used when he wanted sympathy. She'll get over it, he said. She always does. Something inside me went completely still. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just finished. I reached over and disconnected the call. Duke lifted his head and rested it against my arm while I drove. When I got to the kennel building, my friend Marcus opened the side gate wearing Crocs and an old Titans hoodie. He looked at me once and said, "You okay?" I almost lied. That's what I'd done for years. Smiled through things, explained things away. Told myself Brent was stressed, depressed, lost. Instead, I shook my head. Marcus looked down at Duke. Well, he said quietly, he can stay here as long as he needs. I crouched beside Duke one more time before leaving. He licked rainwater off my hand. And standing there in that fluorescent-lit kennel hallway, smelling bleach and wet fur, I realized something ugly. I trusted that dog more than my husband. I sat in my truck for 10 full minutes before driving home. Part of me kept hoping maybe Brent would apologize. Maybe he'd look ashamed. Maybe he'd realize what he'd done. But when I pulled into the driveway, the kitchen lights were off. Only the television glowed blue through the living room window. I walked inside, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Brent didn't even look away from the game. "You done being dramatic?" he asked. I stared at him for a second. Then I picked up my duffel bag and carried it upstairs. And for the first time in a very long time, I locked the bedroom door behind me. The thing people don't understand about bad marriages is that they usually don't turn bad all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Well, I guess I'll let this person make me miserable for the next decade." It happens slowly, one little comment at a time. One apology you accept because you're tired. One night you sleep facing the wall because arguing sounds harder than loneliness. And with Brent, that was the part that messed with my head the most. He had not always been cruel. When we first got married, he was the guy who set the coffee pot before my early PT mornings. Nothing fancy, just Folgers in the black plastic coffee maker we bought at Walmart when money was tight. But I'd come downstairs at 4:45 half asleep, and there it was. Hot coffee, clean mug, little yellow sticky note beside it. "Go smoke 'em, Sergeant." He used to say that like he was proud of me. Back then, we lived in a small rental off Tiny Town Road not far from Fort Campbell. The carpet smelled like old renters, and the washing machine shook like it was trying to escape during spin cycle. But I loved that place, because we were broke and young enough to think being broke together was romantic. Brent worked at a furniture warehouse in Hopkinsville then. Long shifts, bad back, decent paycheck. He'd come home covered in sawdust and cardboard dust, drop his boots by the door and ask me about my day like he meant it. Once my aunt in Paducah had a stroke and I had to leave straight from duty. I forgot my dress uniform pieces for the funeral. Brent drove almost 3 hours to bring them to me. He didn't complain once. He just handed me the garment bag in the hospital parking lot and said, "You take care of your family, I'll take care of you." That was the man I kept looking for later, even after he stopped showing up. The change started after he lost the warehouse job. It was not dramatic at first. The company cut shifts, then cut people. Brent came home with a cardboard box, and this embarrassed look on his face like losing a job made him less of a man in front of me. I tried to be careful with him. Probably too careful. I told him we'd be okay, told him he'd find something else, told him my paycheck could carry us for a while. I thought that was love. He heard it as pity. At first he searched for work, then he searched less. Then he spent more time on his phone sitting in the garage with beer and sports radio. He started betting on games. Small stuff, he said. Just 10 here, 20 there. But money has a way of disappearing quietly when somebody thinks luck owes them something. By year 7, he had stopped bragging about me being tough. Now he said things like, "Must be nice having Uncle Sam take care of you." Or "You come home acting like you outrank everybody." That one always made me laugh at first, because anybody who has served knows the last thing you want after work is more command structure in your kitchen. But Brent meant it. He didn't want a wife anymore. He wanted someone smaller than him. And I had spent too many years becoming hard to shrink. My body changed too. That was another thing he used. I gained weight after my second long deployment. Not a massive amount, but enough that my dress pants got tight and my knees started complaining louder. I had an old training injury that flared up in cold weather, and some mornings going down the stairs made me sound like a box of Rice Krispies. Snap, crackle, regret. I joked about it because that's what I do when something hurts. Brent didn't joke with me, he joked at me. "There she goes," he'd say when I put on my knee brace. "Sergeant Stress reporting for duty." Or, "Maybe if you weren't built like your rucksack, now your knees wouldn't hurt." The first time he said something like that, I stared at him so long he apologized. The 10th time I just kept tying my shoes. That's how you know something is wrong. Not when they hurt you, when you stop expecting them not to. His mother, Linda, made everything worse. Linda lived about 40 minutes away in Springfield, Tennessee, in a little brick duplex full of ceramic angels and old church bulletins. She loved Brent in the blind way some mothers love sons who never grew up. Nothing was ever his fault. Not the job loss, not the drinking, not the betting, not the fact that he was 47 and still needed his mother to call me and explain what men go through. Linda didn't call me Rachel unless other people were around. She called me your wife when talking to Brent like I was a problem he had accidentally purchased. One Sunday after church, she stood in my kitchen looking at my framed awards on the wall near the dining room. "A home needs a woman's touch," she said. I looked down at the casserole I had just taken out of the oven. "Linda, I made chicken and rice." She gave me that tight little smile. "I mean warmth, not a command center." Brent heard it. He laughed. Not loud, just enough. That hurt worse than if he'd agreed out loud. After I came back from that last assignment, the signs got harder to ignore. He kept his phone face down. He started stepping outside to take calls. The bank app showed betting charges he insisted were old pending transactions, which would have been more believable if they weren't dated Thursday. Then there were moving costs, a deposit to a local company owned by Brent's sister's boyfriend. I asked him about it while folding laundry. He said, "You always looking for something to be mad about." That was his favorite trick. Answer a question with an accusation. Make me defend my tone instead of making him explain his behavior. 2 days before the rain incident with Duke, I found the email. I wasn't snooping, not exactly. Our home insurance paperwork came to the shared email because back when we were still pretending to be partners, we set up everything together. I was searching for a renewal notice when I saw a thread between Brent and his sister. Subject line Mom's room. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Brent had written, "After the divorce, Mom can stay with me until things settle. Rachel won't fight it. She never does." I read that sentence 3 times, not if, after. Like my marriage was a weather forecast. Like my home was already divided up in his head. Like I was just some tired woman he could wait out. That was the part that cut deepest. Not Cindy, not even Linda measuring spaces that did not belong to her. It was the casual confidence. Rachel won't fight it. He had built an entire plan around my exhaustion. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a long while. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator kicking on and the low hum of traffic out on Needmore Road. My hands were still. My breathing was normal. I remember noticing that. Sometimes shock does not look like sobbing. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting alone under cheap kitchen lights, realizing her patience has been mistaken for permission. The next morning my phone rang at 8:12. I was in the driveway about to head toward base-holding gas station coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. The caller ID showed a Fort Campbell number. A legal assistance officer wanted me to come in. He said it was about Duke, and about some paperwork Brent Mercer had submitted using my name. I spent most of the drive to Fort Campbell trying to convince myself the whole thing was probably a misunderstanding. That's the embarrassing part. Even after everything, some part of me still wanted to protect Brent from consequences. I kept thinking maybe he signed the wrong form. Maybe somebody at Base Legal mixed up the names. Maybe I was overreacting because I was tired and hurt and running on caffeine instead of sleep. The sky over Clarksville looked heavy that morning. Gray clouds hanging low over Wilma Rudolph Boulevard traffic crawling past chain restaurants and gas stations, like every other weekday in Tennessee. Normal life, that always amazed me after deployment. You could come back carrying a war around inside your ribs, and meanwhile somebody else was arguing over drive-through coffee. I parked outside the legal assistance building and sat there for a minute, rubbing my knee before getting out. Cold weather always made it worse. Inside the waiting room smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. A young specialist behind the desk looked about 19 years old, baby-faced, nervous. He pointed me toward a small office near the back. Major Elena Ruiz was already inside. I knew Ruiz by reputation before I knew her personally. Smart, direct. One of those officers who could shut down nonsense with one sentence and a look. She stood when I walked in. Staff Sergeant Mercer. Ma'am. Her office was plain. Metal desk, army flag in the corner, family photo beside a stack of folders. Another man sat across from her in civilian clothes with reading glasses balanced low on his nose. Legal assistance. Ruiz motioned toward the chair. You doing okay? It caught me off guard enough that I laughed a little. Honestly, that's usually the best version. I sat down slowly. The legal officer slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of forms with Brent's handwriting all over them. My stomach dropped immediately. It wasn't one giant criminal mastermind situation, nothing dramatic like fake identities or stolen military records. That almost made it worse. It was sloppy. Entitled, "The kind of mess people create when they think rules are suggestions for other people." Brent had apparently tried using old, digitally signed paperwork from previous housing documents to update himself as primary contact for certain spouse-related communications tied to my records. There were also requests involving dependent access information and temporary housing correspondence. Not enough to trigger some federal manhunt, but enough to raise questions, especially because some signatures looked altered. I stared at the pages. Why would he even do this? The legal officer adjusted his glasses. From what we can tell, he may have been trying to establish documentation that supported continued residency expectations tied to your benefits and household status. In plain English, Brent was trying to create paper trails before divorce became official. I leaned back in the chair. For a second, I actually felt embarrassed. Like somehow my marriage had become this sad little administrative problem sitting in a government folder. Ruiz watched me carefully. "You're not responsible for another adult's choices, Sergeant." I rubbed my forehead. This feels insane. You'd be surprised how often financial desperation and entitlement show up together. That almost made me smile. Almost. Then Ruiz asked about Duke. I explained the rain incident quietly because saying it out loud suddenly made me feel stupid. Not because it wasn't serious, because hearing your own marriage described in pieces can make you wonder how you tolerated it so long. Ruiz listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. "Duke is documented in your VA-supported treatment plan, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." That did not mean Duke was some magical government dog with secret legal powers, but it did mean there was already medical documentation showing his importance in helping stabilize my anxiety and sleep issues after deployment. The legal officer made a note. Combined with the escalating domestic hostility, this helps establish pattern and environment concerns. I almost laughed again. Pattern and environment concerns. Such polite words for emotional rot. Ruiz folded her hands on the desk. "Rachel, can I speak freely? That's usually better too." She nodded toward the folder. "This isn't about one argument or one dog. This is a man making decisions based on the assumption you'll absorb whatever he does." I looked down at the paperwork, and the worst part was she was right, because I always had. I paid bills quietly, covered overdraft fees quietly, ignored comments quietly. Adjusted myself around Brent's moods like furniture shifting around water damage. I stared at one altered signature for a long time. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Am I overreacting? Ruiz actually leaned back and sighed. "Staff Sergeant, I've watched soldiers survive combat deployments and then destroy themselves trying to save relationships that should have ended years earlier." I swallowed hard. She continued more gently. "Good people can become cruel when they're drowning in resentment. That doesn't make you obligated to drown with them." Nobody had spoken to me that directly in years. At home, everything had become negotiation and tension and emotional weather forecasting. How tired is Brent today? How much has he been drinking? What version of him is walking through the door? Ruiz looked at me for another second before asking, "Do you have civilian legal representation?" "No. You need it." By noon, I was sitting in a law office off Franklin Street in Clarksville, across from a woman named Denise Halpern, who wore bright blue reading glasses and had absolutely no patience for nonsense. I liked her immediately. She skimmed the paperwork while eating peanut M&Ms from a desk drawer. Finally, she looked up and said, "Okay, first thing, stop feeling guilty for being the responsible adult in your own marriage. That obvious, honey, I've practiced divorce law in Tennessee for 22 years. I could smell this mess from the parking lot." Despite myself, I laughed. Then she asked the important question. "Whose name is on the house?" "Mine. Only yours." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That helps. But you still cannot legally throw him out tomorrow because you're angry." "I know." "Good, because judges hate self-help evictions." She explained the process carefully. Written notice. Documentation. Timeline. No screaming scenes. No tossing belongings into the yard. No changing locks in the middle of the night. Honestly, hearing structure calmed me down. Military life does that to you. Give me procedures and I can breathe again. Before I left, Denise filed the formal notice paperwork. Brent would receive it within days. And somehow that terrified me more than deployment ever did. Because overseas, at least I usually knew where danger was coming from. That night, Brent acted like nothing had happened. He ordered takeout from a barbecue place on Riverside Drive and watched ESPN with his boots on the coffee table. Finally, he glanced at me. "You're quiet." I folded laundry without looking up. "Tired." He studied me for a second. Then he smiled a little. "Not warm." "Confident." "You don't have the stomach for this divorce stuff anyway." My hands stopped moving. He said it casually, like fact. Like he already knew the ending. Then he added Mom's coming by next month. Thought maybe we'd do a little family cookout. Nothing big. I looked at him finally. "What for?" "She needs somewhere temporary while her place gets sorted out." Temporary. Funny how people use that word right before trying to move into your life permanently. Brent grabbed another beer. She can bring a few boxes over. A few boxes? I suddenly pictured Linda rearranging my kitchen while Brent stood there pretending none of it was strange. And in that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time. The cookout was not a family gathering. It was a flag planting ceremony. And Brent genuinely believed I would stand there smiling while they claimed my home inch by inch. The first thing people imagine when they hear a story like this is revenge. Big dramatic speeches. Somebody throwing clothes into the yard, slamming doors. Maybe a wine glass breaking for effect. Real life is mostly paperwork and headaches. And honestly, that almost made it harder. Because anger can carry you through a screaming match. It cannot carry you through 30 straight days of pretending your marriage is normal while quietly preparing to end it. The notice arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Brent stood in the kitchen reading it while chewing barbecue chips straight from the bag. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "You hired a lawyer." I kept unloading groceries from Kroger. "Yes. This is cute." "Cute." I put the milk in the fridge carefully because my hand suddenly wanted to shake. "You should take it seriously, Brent." He crumpled the envelope halfway before smoothing it back out again. "You aren't gonna do this." "That's not your decision." He snorted and walked away like I'd threatened to replace the shower curtain instead of legally removing him from my house. That was the strange thing about Brent by then. He believed consequences were for other people. The next few weeks settled into this miserable fake version of domestic life. Every morning I got up at 5:15, coffee, medication, knee brace, drive to base. Every evening I came home wondering which Brent I was getting. Some nights he ignored me completely. Some nights he acted weirdly cheerful like we were going through a temporary rough patch normal couples could fix with enough beer and denial. Then there were the guilt trips. You really want to throw away 15 years? Or, people our age don't start over easy. That one hit harder than I like to admit. Because he was right. Starting over at 42 is different than starting over at 25. At 25, people tell you life is ahead of you. At 42, they start using phrases like settled down and comfortable. Like comfort is the highest goal a woman should aim for. Meanwhile, my knees cracked every time I stood up and I caught myself making old lady noises getting out of chairs. The future did not feel exciting anymore. It felt expensive. Still, I kept going. Denise had told me something during our second meeting that stuck in my head. Do not let guilt make legal decisions for you. So I followed instructions. I opened a separate checking account Brent couldn't access. Moved my direct deposit. Documented household bills. Saved screenshots. None of it felt empowering. It felt sad. Like slowly dismantling a life with a screwdriver. The truck situation got ugly around week 2. Brent drove a black Dodge Ram he loved more than basic financial responsibility. The loan had technically stayed current because I'd been quietly covering late payments for almost a year without telling him. At first I told myself I was protecting us. Really, I was protecting him from reality. Once Denise saw the payment history, she stared at me over her blue glasses. You cannot rescue somebody who keeps digging the hole deeper. So I stopped. Simple as that. No dramatic sabotage. No secret phone calls trying to ruin him. I just stopped fixing what he broke. The lender handled the rest. Around the same time, Linda started appearing more often. Not officially moving in, just orbiting. She'd show up carrying random household items like she was testing the water. A lamp one day, storage bins another. Then a casserole dish. Always acting temporary while behaving permanent. One Saturday morning I walked downstairs and found her standing in my living room measuring the wall beside the television. I blinked at her. "What are you doing?" She smiled without embarrassment, seeing if my china cabinet would fit. My body was so tired at that point I almost laughed. Instead I said, "Linda, why would your china cabinet be in my living room?" She gave me this patient little smile older Southern women use right before insulting you politely. Well, if families are combining spaces, families, plural, like I was the outsider. Brent walked in halfway through that conversation carrying a beer even though it wasn't noon yet. Mom's just thinking ahead. I looked at him. You mean planning. Rachel, don't start. That phrase, don't start. As if every conflict began with me noticing something insane instead of them doing something insane. I grabbed my keys and left before I said something unforgivable. I drove straight to the kennel near base. Marcus was outside smoking when I pulled up. "You look homicidal," he said. "Not yet. Give it time." That made me laugh harder than it probably should have. Duke spotted me through the gate and immediately started wagging so hard his whole back end moved with it. I sat on the concrete beside him for a while, rubbing behind his ears. "You ever feel stupid?" I asked the dog quietly. Marcus overheard me. For loving somebody too long, he asked. I looked up. He shrugged. Military marriages either get stronger under pressure or they crack like cheap plastic. There's usually no middle. I hated how true that sounded. A few nights later, Brent tried kindness. Real effort this time. He cooked breakfast for dinner, eggs, bacon, biscuits from the can. Nothing fancy but enough to remind me of who he used to be. He even apologized. Not perfectly, but enough to make me hesitate. I know I've been hard to live with, he admitted quietly. That sentence alone almost broke me because it was the closest thing to accountability I'd heard in years. Then he said something honest. I just got tired of feeling useless. And there it was. Not the whole truth, but part of it. I sat across from him at the kitchen table looking at this tired, middle-aged man I had once loved so much it scared me. Part of me wanted to believe people could come back from things. Part of me still remembered the warehouse worker covered in sawdust bringing me coffee before dawn. That night I almost told Denise to pause everything. Almost. Then around midnight I woke up thirsty and walked downstairs. Brent was in the garage on speakerphone. With Linda. Just keep packing, he told her. She'll fold before the deadline. I stood there in the dark listening to him laugh softly. Not nervous. Certain. Because even after all this, he still thought I would sacrifice my own peace to make him comfortable. Something inside me settled permanently then. Not rage. Clarity. The next morning I brought Duke home. He limped a little getting out of the truck because he was getting older too. Gray around the muzzle now. Aren't we all? That night he slept beside my bed while rain tapped softly against the windows again. I woke from a nightmare around 3 a.m. Heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Duke lifted his head immediately. Just rested his chin against the mattress beside me, grounding me without making a sound. I sat there rubbing his ears in the dark while my knees throbbed and my marriage collapsed room by room around me. And for the first time I stopped asking myself whether I was being cruel. Cruel was letting somebody slowly convince you that your kindness was weakness. By the end of the month, Brent still had not packed a single box. Instead, he bought extra folding chairs for the cookout. Like he genuinely believed the story would still end his way. The cookout happened on a Saturday, so humid the air felt wet before the rain even started. By 10 in the morning, Brent already had country music playing through a cheap Bluetooth speaker on the back patio. Something loud about trucks and heartbreak and cold beer. Very on brand. I stood at the kitchen sink drinking coffee while Duke lay beside the sliding door watching squirrels in the yard. Brent moved around the house like a man hosting a victory party. That was the strange part. He genuinely believed he had won. Not legally, not morally, just emotionally. He thought if he acted confident enough I would cave like I always had before. Around noon, Linda arrived carrying 2 aluminum trays of potato salad and baked beans. She walked into my house without knocking. "Smells dead in here," she announced. "Good afternoon to you too," I said. She ignored that and immediately started rearranging things on my kitchen counter. Duke watched her carefully from the hallway. Linda never liked him, said his staring made her nervous. Honestly, same. Brent's sister Amanda showed up next with her teenage son, and a phone glued to her hand recording little clips for Facebook like this was some wholesome family reunion. "Everybody smile," she said. I almost admired the commitment to denial. By 1 o'clock, there were maybe 8 people in the backyard. Nothing huge. A couple lawn chairs from Walmart, Bud Light cans in a red cooler, burnt hot dogs rolling around on the grill because Brent always got distracted talking instead of cooking. Normal suburban Tennessee stuff. The kind of afternoon where neighbors pretend not to stare while absolutely staring through their blinds. I stayed mostly quiet. That seemed to bother Brent more than if I'd fought with him. He kept trying to pull me into conversations. "Rachel, tell Amanda about that time you got lost in Texas during training." Or, "See, doesn't this feel better than all that divorce nonsense?" Divorce nonsense. Like this whole thing had been some emotional hobby I picked up temporarily. I answered politely when necessary and spent most of the afternoon rubbing Duke's ears while he rested beside my chair. Then Brent made the mistake. It happened around 2:30. Everybody was outside eating paper plates full of barbecue when Duke wandered near the grill sniffing the air. Brent looked down at him and laughed. At least the dog finally learned who's in charge. A couple people chuckled awkwardly. Linda smiled into her sweet tea. And something shifted in me. Not explosive anger. Just this deep certainty that I was done protecting him from himself. Almost on cue, a tow truck turned slowly into the driveway. At first, nobody reacted. Then Brent frowned. The driver parked behind Brent's black Dodge Ram and climbed out holding a clipboard. Brent stood up immediately. "Can I help you?" The driver glanced down at the paperwork. Brent Mercer. Yeah, I'm here for the vehicle. The silence after that was incredible. Like the whole backyard stopped chewing at once. Brent laughed nervously. No, you got the wrong place. The driver did not laugh back. No, sir. Brent looked toward me. And there it was. The first crack in his confidence. You did this. I folded my napkin carefully before answering. No, Brent. The bank did. His face changed fast then. Confusion first. Then anger. You're making the payments. I was. That landed. Hard. Amanda lowered her phone slightly. Linda stood up so fast her lawn chair tipped backward into the grass. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Rachel, tell this man to leave. The tow truck driver looked exhausted already, like he'd seen this exact family drama 1,000 times. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Brent walked toward me fast enough that Duke stood up immediately beside my chair. Not growling. Just alert. Brent pointed at me. You trying to embarrass me? I finally stood too. My knees cracked loud enough for me to hear them. You embarrassed yourself. Over a damn truck. No overyears. That shut him up for about 3 seconds. Then his phone rang. Cindy. Right there on the screen for everybody to see. Amanda saw it first. Then Linda. And Lord help me, the expression on that woman's face almost made the entire miserable marriage worth surviving. Who is Cindy? She demanded. Brent declined the call too fast. Too late. Amanda slowly sat back down in her chair like she suddenly wanted no part of this family anymore. The tow truck operator started hooking up the Dodge. Metal clanked loudly in the driveway. Brent looked around wildly like somebody else should stop this. Like adulthood was a misunderstanding he could still talk his way out of. Then another vehicle pulled up. White County SUV. Deputy Sheriff. Not dramatic, no sirens, no lights. Just procedure. The deputy stepped out holding paperwork. I recognized him immediately because Denise had warned me this would likely happen once Brent ignored the notice deadline. Brent stared at him. You gotta be kidding me. The deputy stayed calm. Mr. Mercer, this is documentation regarding the property residency matter previously filed. Linda looked between us. What is this? Brent grabbed the papers before the deputy even finished speaking. You called the sheriff on me. I shook my head. No, I followed the law. That line hit him harder than yelling would have. Because deep down, Brent always believed rules were flexible if he pushed hard enough emotionally. The deputy explained the next legal steps while Brent barely listened. Something about Brent looked older suddenly. Smaller too. Like the performance had collapsed all at once. Then he saw another document clipped behind the property paperwork. His face drained white. What the hell is this? I knew immediately. The military paperwork review. Not criminal charges, not handcuffs, nothing dramatic like television. Just official attention. Consequences. Brent looked at me with genuine panic for the first time in years. No, he said quietly. Then louder. No, that's impossible. Nobody answered him. The tow truck began pulling away with the Dodge. Linda started crying angrily about family betrayal and ungrateful women, and what happened to marriage vows. The deputy looked deeply tired of humanity. Amanda quietly gathered her son and left without saying goodbye, and Brent just stood there in the driveway watching everything disappear at once. The truck. The cookout. The illusion. Duke moved beside me and leaned gently against my leg. Brent looked down at the dog, then at me, and I could actually see the moment he understood this was real. Not a bluff. Not another fight he could wait out. Done. You're really doing this, he whispered. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I said the truest thing I'd realized in 15 years. No, Brent, you did. Rain started lightly then. Just a soft Tennessee drizzle drifting across the neighborhood while the tow truck disappeared around the corner. Linda stood frozen in the yard, still clutching her casserole dish like it might somehow save her son from himself. And for the first time in years, I did not feel guilty. I just felt tired. And free. 3 months later, I learned something nobody tells you about leaving a bad marriage. Peace is quiet. Not cinematic quiet, not the kind where sunlight pours through white curtains and everything smells like lavender. Real peace is ordinary. It sounds like the refrigerator humming at night without somebody muttering in the next room. It feels like putting your keys on the counter and knowing nobody is going to punish you for coming home 5 minutes later than expected. It looks like a dog sleeping across your bedroom doorway because he has appointed himself head of household security. Duke took that job very seriously. Brent was gone by then. Not instantly, not cleanly. Nothing about divorce is clean when one person believes consequences are an attack. There were more papers, more calls, more ugly text messages that I screenshotted instead of answering. A few awkward driveway exchanges supervised by a deputy when Brent came to collect his things. Linda came once too. She stood on my porch in sunglasses too big for her face and said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "I hope someday you stop confusing rescuing Brent with loving him." She did not like that, but she heard it. I think that bothered her more. By then, Brent was living with Linda in a small apartment outside Springfield. Through mutual friends, I heard he was telling people the army ruined his marriage. Then it was the lawyer, then the bank, then Cindy apparently because she stopped answering his calls once things got messy. For a while I wanted to enjoy that. I thought I would. I had pictured revenge feeling hot and bright like justice with fireworks. But mostly it felt like setting down a heavy bag I had carried so long my hands stayed curled around nothing. I still missed him sometimes. Not the Brent from the end. I did not miss the sarcasm, the beer cans, the way he could turn a normal Tuesday into a courtroom where I was always on trial. But I missed the man who used to set the coffee pot before PT. I missed the guy who drove to Paducah with my dress uniform hanging across the back seat. I missed who he was before bitterness became his religion. That was the hardest part to explain. You can be done with someone and still grieve them. You can know leaving was right and still sit in a quiet kitchen at 9 p.m., remembering one good morning from 12 years ago. Healing is rude like that. It does not care how sure you are. My body took time too. I started physical therapy at a clinic near Dover Road. Twice a week a woman named Patrice made me do exercises that looked easy until my legs started shaking like cheap patio furniture. "You're stronger than you think," she told me one afternoon. I said, "People keep saying that, and frankly, I'd like to be a little less strong for a while." She laughed and handed me a resistance band. "Too bad, we're booked through Thursday." That became my life for a while. Physical therapy, work, quiet dinners, paperwork, slow walks with Duke near the water when my knees allowed it. I joined a support group too. Not because I wanted to sit in a circle and discuss feelings with strangers under fluorescent lights. I would rather have reorganized an entire supply cage by serial number. But Tanya made me go. The group met in the basement of a community center in Clarksville, and the first night I walked in I almost turned right back around. There were folding chairs, bad coffee, and women who looked like they had survived entire weather systems. Military wives, veterans, divorced women, widows. One retired nurse named Carol who said she came because after 40 years of marriage, she realized she had no idea what she liked for dinner unless somebody else requested it. That one stayed with me. The pains of getting older are not just knees and weight and sleep that comes in broken pieces. Sometimes it is waking up after years of sacrifice and realizing you became dependable to people who never became grateful. That truth hurts in places no doctor can x-ray. One night after group, a woman about 65 put her hand on my arm and said, "Honey, the scariest thing isn't being alone. It's realizing how long you were alone while somebody was still in the house." I thought about that all the way home. By fall, the house started feeling like mine again. Not perfect. Just mine. I moved Linda's imaginary china cabinet spot into a reading corner, a cheap armchair from Target, a lamp, a little table where I kept coffee and whatever book I kept pretending I would finish. I left my military awards on the wall. I even added one more frame. A photo of Duke with his gray muzzle sitting beside me on the porch like a retired general. A few weeks later, Marcus told me he had heard Brent broke down at a bar and admitted he messed up the only good thing he had. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt sad. Because some people only become honest after honesty can no longer save them. That is a terrible way to live. But it was no longer my job to soften the landing. One morning I woke before sunrise and made coffee in that same old black coffee maker Brent used to set for me. For a second the memory hit sharp. Then Duke's tags jingled down the hallway. He came into the kitchen, stretched and rested his head against my thigh. Outside Clarksville was still dark. A delivery truck rolled by. Somewhere down the street a neighbor's wind chime moved in the early breeze. Nothing big happened. No speech. No victory music. Just me standing in my own kitchen with one hand on my dog's head, realizing I was breathing normally. I did not win. I just stopped losing. And for the first time in years, the quiet in that house did not feel lonely. It felt safe. If you have ever had to rebuild yourself after years of disrespect, I hope you know you are not alone. And if Duke were here, he would probably tell you not to trust anybody who hates dogs.